So, like, when were you
Well,
born? Like, and then, like, how
I
was
was born in
school?
1940. Okay. I was born in 1942. So in 1947, when Jackie Robinson uh, came to the major leagues, obviously the season started in April, and it was then. I was only 5 years old, and I wasn't following baseball quite that closely that I knew a whole lot about it till the Phillies won the pennant in 1950 and actually beat the Dodgers to win the pennant, but then lost the World Series to the Yankees. But I remember that it was a huge thing when there was a Jackie Robinson's breakthrough into the major leagues. It was as big as everybody says it was, because for obvious reasons, he was an exceptional player, but he took a ton of abuse in the minor leagues. When he was in Montreal, which is the AAA farm team for the Dodgers back then, he took all kinds of abuse from the fans and from other teams, and that continued in 1947. In fact, Branch Rickey, who was the general manager of the Dodgers, did select him when he was at UCLA because of his personality and his inner strength. He was a very, very strong person to be able to put up with the crap that he had to. It's interesting that 2 months later in the American League, Larry Doby, D-O-B-Y, broke in, and he was the first black person in the American League. He was with the Cleveland Indians, and he was right behind Jackie.
Mm-hmm.
So Jackie really wasn't alone, but those two guys were pretty much it till the following year when the Dodgers, who were way ahead of everybody with this, brought Roy Campanella up. Roy Campanella had an Italian father and a black mother. And the following year, they brought Don Newcomb up, and Don Newcomb was a black pitcher who was very, very good. And an interesting contrast with that is Philadelphia Phillies and the Philadelphia A's. There were two teams in Philly back then. Both remained white well into the 50s, and they probably gave Jackie Robinson the worst time. Abuse-wise. The Phillies had a lot of players who were from down the deep south, and there was a lot of animosity toward Jackie entering the league. Now, did I personally, was I totally aware of that? Not really. My first experience with somebody who was black was in first grade. Our first grade teacher told me that we're going to have a person who's not quite like us moving in, and the next day. So when he came in, we sort of all stared at him. I'm not sure if that was a good thing. I think she just should have said, we're going to have a new student, but we know better now. And she didn't. She was a good teacher, and when she wanted to do the best for the young fellow who was coming in. By the way, my first experience with him was not good. He was throwing chestnuts at the kids who were walking by when we were walking home from school. And he nailed me pretty good on the leg, and I didn't like him at all. I didn't draw any conclusions racially on that, but I did not like Henry Taylor. He was not my favorite person. Frankly, baseball did not really. I was probably I think Willie Mays was with the Giants. I think he was the Rookie of the Year in 1952. I mean, it grew then rapidly. Till today, there's a number. Obviously, a lot of teams have black players on them. That's one of baseball's problems, though. The Latino players have loved the game, and black players have sort of gravitated toward basketball and football. And so there's not as black players playing baseball right now, but that's probably not what you're looking for here. My experience with black kids was pretty much non-existent. We lived in a white area completely. Growing up in high school in Royersford, there were three families who lived down on the bottom of Fifth Avenue. The Daltons, the Wallers, and the Jones family. And the ministerium from the Royersford Church tried to get better housing for them. And we did. We talked one of the local car dealers who owned property into renting houses on Walnut Street to them, and they did. And Jim Dalton is still a good friend of mine today. I see him in all the baseball games. Mom knows him. She tried to get him fixed up with her girlfriend at work many years ago. Jim's single, has gone through life single, but he's very involved in his church and very involved in. He's a big Springford fan.
Do you remember your do you remember your parents saying anything?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember your parents saying anything or doing anything?
Well, yeah, there's one major story about that. I think I've told you, honey. We were at annual conference in Richmond, and that was 1952. I'm sure that was 1952. And my dad was a delegate, and my mom was walking us around the city to see all the historic sites because it was the capital of the Confederacy. We saw the legislature building for the Confederacy. We saw Robert E. Lee's home and Jefferson Davis' home. And then for lunch, we walked up to one of the main streets, and we walked into a Kresge's and sat down at the counter. The 5 and 10 cent stores used to have counters where you could get lunch and breakfast, and you could get a dinner. And they wouldn't serve us, and we didn't understand. And as it turned out, we were sitting at in the black counter as opposed to the white counter. Well, we're from Pennsylvania. We didn't have separate counters up here. You know, it was just didn't happen. And so my mother, who is very mild-mannered, when they told her to move, she refused. And she said, there's no reason why you can't serve us here. And she was very stubborn about it. And Glenn and I were just sort of, okay, Mom, whatever. But in any event, the cops came and it took us away because the Jim Crow laws were in effect until 1954. And so it was separate but equal. So, I mean, technically, you would get the same food, but there were separate counters. They let us go real quick. I mean, I forget what happened. But it was interesting. It was my personal first incarceration. And, and probably my mom's, too. But she was livid that this was still going on in her mind. It was totally unjust, I guess is the word I want to use. I see. Other than that, and that gives you a little feeling what it was like back then to be black. Because if those folks had gone to the white counter, they wouldn't have been served, and they would have, they would have called the cops on them too.
Yeah.
So that was very common back then. In fact, when we went to annual conference down south until 1954, there were separate motels. I mean, everything was separate. So the restaurants were down south in particular, not anything like up here. So we grew up in a very different situation. The South was almost another country when it came to race back then.
Right.
Not that we were perfect up here,
right.
but we didn't have separate but equal stuff at all. It was all together. Everything was together. So what Jackie did, really, he was 7 years ahead. I mean, what he did was a major step for civil rights, even though he broke through in a sport. It was America's pastime, but it attracted more attention, I think, than anything else that could have happened back then to begin the changes that were necessary, certainly necessary. Okay, I'm running out of stuff.
Okay, so just simple stuff like your love for baseball. Like, why do you love baseball?
Yep.
What are your first memories of it? Have you ever played
baseball?
Yeah, baseball.
Baseball.
Yeah.
Well, I played all the time. My dad had catch with Glenn and I when we were little kids all the time. And I played Little League. We moved to Spring City, and I was 8 years old. But the thing I remember about baseball is I had to go in the hospital when I was a little kid. I think I told you this. I had to get urinary tract surgery. And It was rather extensive, and I was there for several weeks. And the hospital that this was done in was Abington, which was a long way from Royersford and Spring City.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad rented me a TV. Now you got to understand, this is like 1948, and TVs were just not very common. Not everybody had one. So so here, I'm the only kid in the kids ward at Abington Hospital who had a TV. Well, apparently the nurses and doctors didn't have one either, because I turned the Phillies game on at night after my parents left to go home, and I was supposed to go to sleep. Well, the nurses always would let me stay up and watch the game, and they'd come in and see how the Phils were doing. It was really funny.
That's neat.
But, yeah, it was. And they only had one camera back then, and it was right behind home plate, and then they'd move it around if they hit a fly ball to the outfield. You only had one view of the game. It wasn't like it is now where there's like, I don't know, 10 cameras at every game.
Right.
But that's when I really learned to love baseball, and I've been loving it ever since. I think one of the things that's really neat about baseball is it's a sort of a sport of anticipation,
Mm-hmm.
because you can do 30 different things and watch a baseball game.
Right.
It just, yeah, you can play cards, do crossword puzzles, read a book, all kinds of stuff. It's called America's Pastime because it covers like 5 or 6 months. I mean, it starts in April and ends in October. I guess that's 6 months, right?
Yeah.
I think so. So it covers a lot of our time period, our lives. There's 162 games in a season, and that's not counting spring training. We've been doing it a long time. It's a really good sport, and it's a sport where social change has taken place too, mostly because of what Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby and the rest of those guys accomplished.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Papa.
Anything else?
I don't think so right now.
Okay. Well, if they want something specific, if they'd like some specific reactions to something, you just let me know.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
All right, thank you.